All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the final day of KeyShot World 2020 Virtual Edition. It was 9 days of great content and discussion for KeyShot 9. Had some wonderful render contests that are still continuing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But wanted to wrap it up here at Designer Roundtable. Wanted to bring everyone back, kind of have a talk about what we learned this week, what we liked, where we see some things going. So I'm Derek Cicero. I'm Vice President of Products and Strategy here at Lexion. You've probably seen me in the intros each day. And I'll be kind of moderating today. Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Ryan Levy. I'm the Global Training and Creative Specialist at KeyShot.
Kareem?
Yeah, my name's Kareem Merchant. I'm a creative specialist here. You probably have heard me on some of the tutorials we've put up on YouTube.
And Jacob?
Hey everyone, my name is Jacob Fine and I'm one of the designers at PepsiCo.
And Will?
Will was muted. I am Will Gibbons and I am a kind of a freelance product rendering and animation specialist.
And Tyler?
I'm Tyler. I'm one of the designers co-running Render Weekly and a designer at Enlisted Design.
And Brian Krause?
Yeah, second half of Render Weekly, also a freelance industrial designer.
Okay. And George?
I'm George Olarte, a Wimpy packaging designer at Spin Master.
Yes. So thank you all. Obviously, for the ones who presented, great job. Thank you so much for kind of shifting gears here. Obviously, as people probably know, KeyShot World is meant to be an in-person event in Huntington Beach, which was going to be our fourth event that we threw. Obviously, given the global situation, we had to shift gears and kind of move it online. And so I want to thank all of you for kind of pivoting very quickly to kind of making that online. What were your guys' thoughts about, obviously it was a different kind of interaction with the people, much more sort of written Q&A and sort of seeing things on Render Weekly, the render contest. You're not getting that kind of face-to-face networking. What were some sort of your takeaways of the virtual conference? I'll start with you, Will.
Sure. So while I've been to some of the previous in-person events and they've always been fun, I will say that with this one being virtual, I think you guys did pretty much the best you could given, the circumstance and made the most of it. I do think that probably the reach and the number of people who are able to benefit from the event is going to actually exceed what could have been done in person. So that's a win for sure. I also think that the ability to field some of the Q&A during the sessions went down quite well. So in my mind, while it's nice to see people face to face, if we can't do that at all, this was a great alternative. And the fact that you were able to, occupy almost an entire week, I don't know, it seemed like a really cool event. And the fact that it's archived and something people can tune into for the future, that's another good win, I think.
Yeah, that's the ones that I definitely kind of like. For people who maybe can't travel on a normal basis for business, can obviously kind of follow along at home, kind of on their own time. Ryan, any feedback on the event?
Yeah, I think Will brought up a good point about the attendance. I think the amount of people that tuned in for that, it was kind of astonishing. And as you know, I got comfortable speaking into a mic but not seeing anybody, which is kind of odd for me, but it was a good experience and a lot of the questions were great. I think we got to interact digitally with a lot of people, maybe more so than in person. So I thought that was interesting.
Okay. Yeah, and one thing, I really kind of liked how, especially on the last day, we kind of went through lighting, right? We kind of went through lighting essentials for, an hour, and then got into the lighting advanced. And if you kind of look at the whole things as a piece, you really can start from not knowing anything about lighting and KeyShot all the way to be pretty advanced by the end of that. Now, obviously, you probably need to watch out, 2 or 3 times to really grasp all the concepts. But I'll kind of pivot into my first question. One of the things that people really struggle with on any tool, but especially an advanced tool, like a KeyShot, is sort of how to learn, right? How do you start from, I know I have this problem, which is I want to get to this end state of having this visual replace photography. I don't really know where to begin. So I'll kind of ask everyone here, how did you kind of learn KeyShot? How do you like to learn? And how do you continue to learn? And I'll start with you, Jacob.
So, well, originally I learned in school, and I think from there, is when I just started kind of challenging myself to things. So, you know, I remember like, I think finals were over and I went into the lab and I was like, I want to model a like camera and render it. And my goal was to like find an image online and then replicate the image in KeyShot. And I think that that's something that I've continued to do throughout my whole kind of career as a designer, is like find an image online and then try and replicate it. And I remember as new features come out, I used to, you know, find something and try and use that new feature. So I think when interior lighting came out, I was blown away, and I sat at my desk and I was like, I'm gonna CAD model and render my desk and what's around me and try and replicate like what I can see from my desk, which was like the windows, the stucco wall, and all of that stuff. And that alone, like in my free time, I would do like 20 minutes, add some stuff. I'll add blinds to it now. I'm gonna add the little beaded metal pull string. You know, that kind of stuff really helped me not only like learn it, but like to demystify it so I could just jump in and you know, do it. And then when real projects came around, it started to be a lot easier versus learning on the project.
George, I'll ask the same question to you. How do you like to learn, and how do you continue to learn?
Well, for KeyShot, it was sort of like, you know, sink or swim, where I mean, it was actually like, you know, using it for projects and just trying to you know, kind of learn it on my own. So with KeyShot, I pretty much learned on my own, you know, with a couple of YouTube tutorials, and then there are a lot of 3D guys at work also that, you know, I could bug and get in their ears, so they would like kind of show me some of the ropes. But yeah, it was really with no, you know, other than maybe 3D Studio Max, and I think I extruded type. I think that was like the first thing I ever did, and probably the only thing I'll ever do on 3D Studio Max.
Tyler or Ryan, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, so my background is industrial design, so I learned KeyShot a little bit in school, and it just became this matter of like, how do I make this thing that I designed look even cooler, right? And so we had a very like basic level of KeyShot, and then I just took it up. Like one of my professors, Paul Skaggs, he would say like, you know, if you want to get good at your software, you need to play in it. Like you need to dedicate time to just like not have a deadline and just go play. And so I would just like spend my Sunday afternoons sitting in my apartment watching KeyShot videos, and then I'd like go into the computer lab and like try stuff that I was learning in the videos. And it just became this like, oh, now I learned this feature and I think I can use it for this, or I think I can use it for this. So it's just a matter of like watching and then trying to apply those things into other realms of my designs.
And there's a common theme that kind of all of you would say, which is you set aside time to kind of play on personal projects. And so, I mean, do you guys actually mark that down? Okay, you know, Sunday from noon to 4, or do you sort of get in the habit of just doing it?
I think when I see an image that I feel like I'm impressed by, that's what spurs me to go and feel like, damn, I need to catch up. Like I need to start learning again. So, you know, I think one thing that we didn't mention, which, you know, videos, yes, like those are really helpful, the webinars, stuff like that. But I also think just going on the KeyShot forum and looking at like the amazing shots and you know, looking at the people who are obviously better than me, being like, how did they do it? Even just like, you know, engaging on there and asking like, hey, can you screenshot your material graph editor? I really have no idea how you did that. Or, you know, a lot of times people will actually take the time to go through step by step. And I think the more people engage in that platform, also the more that kind of stuff will populate into it, which will help everyone. So I think a good little like button is to like, check that out.
Yeah. And actually, I'll ask this question to Kareem, Will, and Ryan, since you guys actually, you know, create the learning content. that's a really interesting question. Sort of, how do you decide? I mean, obviously, there's so much to learn, right? So it's sort of like, how do you, when you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to teach material graph, or I'm going to teach lighting, for example, how do you decide? Okay, these are the concepts that I think really kind of work together, and this is where maybe this is really a separate conversation or a deeper dive.
I'll go first. I have the unfair advantage of having the privilege to have taught in-person teams. So when I was working at Luxion doing on-site trainings, by being exposed to many different groups with different understandings and different goals, I would be able to take note of trends. And it turns out that there are the same things that pop up across teams. And it's not that I went about it super strategically, but those would stay on my mind. So when it comes time to, at least when I was doing trainings more frequently, I would be able to test out one way of trying to show how something works. And then if it was well received, I would just keep doing that until my process until my inner compass was more calibrated toward what people get hung up on and where the quick solution is. Sometimes I can go and give too much information on a subject and people are not interested, it doesn't work as well. But sometimes a short explanation is a lot better. And so again, that's largely a trial and error thing. But on that note, I will offer a slightly different answer that most people answered as far as where do you begin learning some of the KeyShot stuff. And I will at least say, for those who don't have or feel like they don't have the time to play and explore, I'm a big fan of just-in-time learning, which is wait till you need to learn something for a project, agree to the deadline, and then get busy doing your research online as to how to figure out just what you need just to deliver that one thing. And in time, those skills will build up. And then having those wins under your belt, you will make time for the exploratory stuff. But anyway, back to Ryan and Kareem on the how do you choose what to teach?
Yeah, Kareem, I don't know if you wanted to chat about that.
Go ahead, Kareem.
Sure, yeah. For me, it's a lot of playing around in the program, and whenever I experience issues myself, that's usually like a point that I write down that I'm going to kind of dive deeper into, because if I'm experiencing it, I'm sure other people are as well. And another great thing is I stay connected with a lot of my friends who are KeyShot users, because I don't go out and teach a lot of teams, but I'm making webinars and I'm making content here in the studio, well, at the office. And so I get a lot of feedback from people I know using the program and difficulty that they're having and confusion points. And I kind of try to gear my learning content around that as well. And from what I hear of other people who are going out and teaching it. So that's how I approach that.
Yeah, and to touch on Will's topic, it's really just like when I am on site training, I see patterns of what people are asking. It might be in different forums or, in different ways that they're trying to achieve it. But those are the questions that I tend to hold on to and bring up again in the future, solutions for those.
Great. And I mean, and you touched on something, Will, that kind of really ties into the training discussion. And I'll kick this question to Jacob and George to start. But, one of the big things is you have a new release of a product and we have a new feature, right? We have fuzz or we have real cloth, right? And one of the issues I think people always have is sort of I have to get my work done. I've got a workflow. I've got, deadlines. I don't have the time to kind of learn a new feature. And so, for some people I've heard, they basically, to your point, kind of wait until the need is there, and then they go and dig around and say, okay, I have this problem, who can solve it? Some people say, okay, I'm going to look at, KeyShot 9 comes out. I'm going to dedicate X amount of time to kind of learning this new feature. So for you, George and Jacob, how do you guys kind of take in new features when is it kind of when a need comes or when the software gets released?
I guess I'll jump in. Usually when the need comes, for me, it's usually, like you said, we're busy doing all kinds of, real work, and then trying to find a moment to kind of learn some new stuff is a challenge. But for me, to actually take the time to do that and learn something is enriching and will only, make me better. So for me, it's a win-win. You learn something, but you're also bringing something to the company but usually is a first come first served basis type of need.
I think also not having a fear to just tell your manager that you want to take an hour to learn something, because I mean, honestly, like my manager just texted me and he was like, "Hey, do you have time?" And I was like, "Nope, I'm on a KeyShot panel right now." Like he knows, and he's like supporting that aspect of, you know, the fact that, hey, when I need something, he'll know how to do it because I'm giving him an hour now when we're not in a crisis mode. So I think that that's something that takes some like self-learning on how to like own or manage up to your managers that you are prioritizing certain things. And I think that's also just a good learning in like your career in general.
That's great. Yeah. So, and I'll ask this one to Ryan, Kay, and Tyler. You know, I have been around long enough that I actually remember they used to ship you a manual, a written manual when you bought software. Those days are long gone. But you know, one of the things that we kind of have really grappled with internally is, you know, there used to be one channel where you told someone how software worked. Like you got the manual and that was it, or maybe you got a DVD and that was it. You know, now, you know, you've got YouTube, you've got the forum, and then you've got what I kind of call these tiny bites that I've really tried to focus on the last year and a half of things like Instagram. How can you kind of reach people in lots of different ways, maybe even when you're not even with the software, like on Instagram, showing them, you know, an aspirational video or an image, and then a very quick unveil of how they did that. Even if you're not necessarily learning that, you know, in that moment, it's inspiring you to go back to your desk at some point and learning it. So, I mean, you guys are kind of really on the forefront, I think, of what I consider kind of much more a different way of kind of providing information to people. How, you know, what inspired you to kind of do it the way that you're doing it? And what did you see that was different from kind of some of the traditional go on a forum and kind of read and post kind of a mindset?
Yeah, I'll start. Between Tyler and I, and how Render Weekly was even formed was exactly what you're talking about. It all started pretty much on Instagram and YouTube, and also a little bit of a competitive attitude between him and I, like kind of, you know, showing off each other's renders and being really stoked on a certain rendering. But yeah, I mean, we, you know, having seen that there's also a massive community that loves to do the same thing is really inspiring. And the information needs to be sent quickly, you know, and people want to know how to do certain things really fast, or, you know, pick up on those things. And, you know, shout out to Will here and a couple of you guys that post things on YouTube, as well as, you know, Esben Oxholm, who's kind of like the big name of the YouTube KeyShot world. It's just been really nice to have these quick tips available. It as you can see, it really feeds a community who's really wanting to learn really fast. And yeah, you know, the most quick bites of information I've seen, you know, as Tyler and I watch Render Weekly, is people even just posting pictures of a material graph. That alone is sometimes the most vital information that people need, is just to see how a material was made. So
yeah, just to add on that, I think like with Instagram and YouTube, there's a speed at which you can ask questions to like your peers. So for example, like, you know, you'll be scrolling through and you'll like see someone's render and they'll post it to show it, but then you can DM them right away and say like, hey, how'd you do this? And then like, for example, Esben a while back, he did this like really sick speaker grill and he posted it for Render Weekly and everyone was like, how did you do that? And like 2 days later, he posted a video on how to do it. And so I think like there's this like speed that the internet and social media is giving to education. And I think things are changing quite a bit in that way.
And it's interesting because when I go on, you know, your feed, you're on Instagram, one thing I've noticed is, you know, traditionally what I saw more kind of 10 years ago was people like, I'm a SolidWorks person, I'm a Rhino person. They would kind of define themselves very much by kind of the tool, the actual visual creation tool they were using. What I've seen more and more is people, especially on your feed, really focus on the render. They're trying to get the render done. And, you know, I use a little Blender, I use some in 4D. It's almost sort of like, it's sort of inverted where the finished product was sort of driving the tools versus the tools driving the finished product. Have you guys, I mean, all experienced that? There's sort of been a bit of a shift in kind of how people are kind of looking at the tools as, I'm going to have a bunch of tools in my toolbox versus just sort of being expert on one tool. And I'll kick that to you first, Will.
Sure. So I've seen that in kind of, I think there's two different camps. I've seen that in the workplace with teams where they are primarily using one main tool. Let's call it SolidWorks, because in the product design community, I think that's pretty ubiquitous. Lately, though, what you'll see is in those larger companies with the budgets that can afford it, they'll have a studio or a separate group that does all of the public-facing images. And so that group tends to have a different set of tools. Could be Maya, Cinema 4D, could be V-Ray or Octane or whatever. And what'll happen is you've got designers with design intent who want to see their product delivered and understood in a certain way. And when that has to be passed off to another group, things can get lost in translation. And there's a lot of wasted resources because it's pretty costly to start creating new assets in an entirely different pipeline. And so what we've seen, or what I've seen, is a shift where you've got the designers who want to take a little more ownership in creating more polished visuals. And so what that does is that opens up the need to broaden their tool set in some cases, because if they want to show a cable that's flexible and animated, that's not really going to be set up or aided by their SolidWorks tool set. So they may be turning to another tool that can quickly allow them to deliver that or communicate that idea or realize that. Could be a fluid simulation, could be something else. But the point being, I think that shift, it has more to do with some of those points I just mentioned. Now, when it comes down to the individual who maybe doesn't have to work within any given kind of pipeline or set of tools, I think that you're seeing much more of a shift where people are picking up and trying to create this nice collection of tools where they feel no matter what challenge comes their way, they're going to have something that allows them to get it done. And they're a little more tool agnostic or pipeline agnostic. So I do think that you're seeing people pick up more software. The challenge, of course, becomes how much time it takes to pick up those new skills. If you spend 4 years learning a software and then that software gets acquired by a bigger company and then dissolved, oh my gosh, does that ever hurt? So something like KeyShot's low barrier to entry is what makes it so attractive for so many people. And for better or for worse, we're seeing other software companies pick up on that and make more tools much more user-friendly, because that's what it's going to take for their tools to not become obsolete.
Yeah. Tyler and Ryan, any thoughts on that? Ryan K?
I think everyone's nailing it kind of on the head. It's been fun to see how the quick pace of learning is affecting the way that people even work and the flow and how that a nice rendering comes to be.
Yeah, I think just, if you have the vision of what you want in your head, whether or not you use a hammer or a nail, you need to put two boards together. And if you know how to use the hammer better, or not screw or nail, right? If you know how to use a hammer better to put the nail in, then use that. If you know how to use a screw better, use the drill. Like it's all about like the end goal, and however you get there, I think like is a personal preference and personal flow.
Great. George, one thing in your presentation, which I loved, which was hysterical, but if you did not check out George's presentation already, I would be package designer, definitely check it out online. But you talked about, how when you first came to Render World, sort of the car people were in one corner and, the CG people in another corner. And I certainly have experienced that myself where, traditionally, I think a lot of people they did games, they did VFX, they did CAD, and there wasn't much cross-pollination. But sort of as things have changed, as the VFX industry obviously being very kind of ebb and flow with regard to the jobs that are out there, I've seen more and more people, like you're talking about studios, where they'll bring in people with a games background or a VFX background into a design studio to help them augment their skills. Have you, George, sort of seen that shift in your experience over the years, where there is more, it's less of kind of everyone's in their own corner and more cross-pollination?
There has been, and and then there hasn't. A lot of people like to hold on to their little specialty. But look at me. I'm not a 3D guy, but I started learning it, and so I found the cross pollination with me, and and other people have been sort of. There's a guy Hazy at Spin Master who's an illustrator who does 3D, who does graphics. So he's like the multiple bard as in Dungeons and Dragons talk. He's just got a lot of skills, and I love that, and I love being able to talk to him, because it's not just talking to him about design. He could say, so well, why don't we do this in ZBrush, and why don't we do this in this? And I'm like, oh, I don't know about that kind of stuff. So he'll definitely school me. So it's great. And one thing when I do talk about those tropes, I was kind of just playing around with sort of the parody on Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but I did feel that when I first went to Render World, sort of that everyone was in their little spots and stuff. But yeah, the last one I went to, we were sitting with a whole bunch of other people, and I think initially it's like that, but during the mixer is when you start blending with everybody, and I miss that about this KeyShot World.
Well, we will all get together face to face at some point soon. Jake, have you seen that at Pepsi? Have you seen a difference in kind of some of the backgrounds that they bring on for visualization?
Yes and no, but I feel like it's inadvertent. Like, I don't think we're necessarily hiring specific trade skill sets, but it just happens to be that a lot of new designers know newer or different tools than when some designers that are older, or the different generations of design throughout the company all have different skills. Like so for example, John Marish, who was learning KeyShot, who I think is also in the attendees list. He's like a master in Photoshop to the level that I don't even understand. Like, he's in the channels, like doing the different RGB values and all of that stuff. That's like not something that I ever learned in school. So that level of different ways to get to a finished perfect image is something that I feel like is really cool, that it's happening organically. There are people like me who are super into KeyShot. Now, there are also people that are in our studio who are like in rendering programs that I have no idea about, but they're doing completely different things, like VR style, almost like video game movement and that kind of stuff. So I think it's really interesting, the different skills, and we all sit next to each other, and we have no cubicles, and it's an open studio, so we're all kind of seeing what everyone's doing and kind of poking and prodding to learn new things. But I don't think it's specifically targeted.
Okay. Ryan and Levy and Will, obviously you go on site and have gone on site and done trainings. Have you seen that much? I mean, where people are kind of coming in with, obviously things like game engines are really kind of changing how people, look at design, things like AR and VR. Have you seen a sort of a shift in kind of maybe some of the backgrounds of the folks that you're training now?
Trying to think of specific examples. I think if you're going to see that, it's likely to be at a larger, I guess maybe one of a couple scenarios, maybe a larger studio where they've kind of been willing to diversify their core skill set. So they're open-minded, and they're bringing in people with a more broad, or perhaps arguably tangential set of tools. And they're curious to see how they can leverage that. And I think that's probably going to be driven by really smart managers who may be having those hiring decisions. And they can say, hey, I think I can work with this guy to do this, to fill this void. I think you'll also see that maybe at some of the smaller studios who cannot afford to have 25 designers, but they have 5. So they really need to push to diversify their skill set. Both, I think, are smart moves. Can I say with confidence I'm seeing it a lot? I don't think the answer is yes, but I think we will certainly see much more of it. I think Ryan's got to unmute himself real quick.
Ryan?
Sorry about that. So in my experience, in my last position where I was, the ID team started to adopt like Gravity Sketch and going into the virtual space. And it became a very important tool for them because they use that for ideation early, and they would take those models created in VR into production. So I'm seeing that a lot with like kind of what Will was saying, companies with good managers who are progressive thinkers and can kind of see, you know, the benefits of it. So that's all it really takes is just progressive thinking and understanding how to use those tools and what they'll bring to those teams.
Great. And I'll jump off that ideation point to kind of ask a question to everyone in the group, because this has come up, excuse me, multiple times in the Q&A of sort of, especially when you're talking about sort of things like animation or things like model sets where you're kind of doing different views, is what is your process when you sit down to start something to kind of storyboard out and organize kind of what you're doing? So you know you kind of need to get to the sort of end state. And, you know, for some people, they just like, I'm just going to start and do it. Some people say, I'm going to sit down and really kind of map out, you know, my process, put Post-it notes everywhere and, you know, do storyboards. And obviously there's no right or wrong answer, but I kind of want to ask everyone here individually, you know, what your process is when you're starting a project, kind of how you organize it, how you, if you storyboard, what tools or techniques or tricks, if you have, that you found extremely helpful to kind of make sure you sort of stay on track. I'll start with you, George, and kind of go around.
I like doing mood boards. I'm a big fan of mood boards. Creating, and I'll really dive deep in sort of creating a mood board that will sort of guide me, throughout the whole project, and something I could pull reference from. And if I feel like I'm going astray, I'll look at that mood board and I'll be like, am I staying true to it, or am I morphing into something crazy? So I'll know exactly where I'm going, and if I like it, I like it. If I don't, then that's kind of how I roll.
Okay. Kareem, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I love that mood board. I've used them quite a bit. I use Pinterest, and I'll set up mood boards for styles and imagery that I'm kind of looking at. But as for like organizing my process, I'm really analog. I like writing things down in my sketchbook. I'll usually essentially make like a shot list, and I'll break it down, the kind of angles I want and the progression that I'm looking for. But yeah, I like doing things a little bit analog. If you've seen my office, I have Post-it notes everywhere.
Yes. Tyler?
Yeah, usually start with a mood board. One thing that I like to do is I'll, like in text, I'll write out like, here are all the things that I need to show from this project. And then from the text outline, I'll start to make shot lists, just so I can make sure that I have my bases covered. And then from there into KeyShot.
Okay. Will?
I think that my process changes a little bit, whether it's client work or personal. So if it is for a client, we need to make sure that we're communicating clearly, both are understanding each other. And that kind of goes back to that old adage, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe. Same thing, it's planning. So for me, if it's an animation, definitely thumbnails. If it's not an animation, thumbnails to me are a little bit excessive, not the best use of my time, because I can be very quick in KeyShot. For me, it's I'll have project phases, which are just make sure we establish camera angles first, and then dial in or camera angles with like basic materials, and then I'll do rounds of revisions where we get more and more close to the final lighting, materials, etc. If it's for a personal project, sometimes the kernel of an idea gets sketched on a notebook, but 9 times out of 10, they are bullet points in a note on my iPhone. So I'm out and about and I see something interesting. This happened a lot more when I was traveling more because I couldn't take my sketchbook out. I'm not a big sketcher anyway. I just have a note called project ideas, and it's like 100 items, and it's like translucent plus this form. It's like super shorthand, but it's just this little spark of an idea, and then the rest I just do in KeyShot or 3D modeling in KeyShot. So
Jacob?
I didn't unmute. Wow, I'm like way less organized than all of you. I think my way, honestly, I don't take notes. Maybe that's like a general weirdness of a designer. Like I literally gave away like 10 moleskins because like people keep giving me notebooks and I never use that. Like don't sketch in notebooks. I've always sketched on 8.5 by 11 printer paper, and then I like to like get rid of it. I don't like to keep anything. But when I jump into a project, I feel like usually my way of organizing is like when I hit a roadblock that I don't like the way that something's happening. Like if I need to change camera angles a couple of times, I'll be like, okay, I guess it's time to set some cameras up. But usually I'm doing things so organically and quickly that I'm not really, thinking ahead on what I need. And also, I guess a little bit different, I'm not being necessarily asked to do renderings all the time. So, when I do choose to do a rendering on my own accord, it kind of is a little bit more organic, like what I might feel like is the right thing to do for a specific project. But I think a lot of times that I'm a little bit less organized, but, also in my presentation, I mentioned that I do a lot of templates. So I think, setting up my files once, and then after that, when I need a front view of something or a side view, I have those different files that are already set up that I just open. So, I'm not necessarily having to like really forethink a lot after the first time I do something.
And when you do a template, is that sort of a trial and error? So you start with kind of a template, and then each time you realize, oh, I need this, you add to it? Or do you sort of sit down and map out ahead of time, okay, I need to build a template. What needs to go into this template?
No, it's definitely that. So like, I'll make a front view template of a can, and then someone will be like, oh, we need a side view as well. And I'll be like, okay, I guess I'm adding a side view to this template, and I'll save it separately, but then that will be the new one that I kind of go to a lot. And, the same thing is like, I'll iterate and make it better. So, lighting, I'll start to refine over time. But a lot of times, again, it's for internal reviews, stuff like that. So I have the leeway to really, improve over time versus have the image go out into the wild and be the final image. So, I remember a story of doing a can, and originally I had like metal as the material, and it was like having some really weird lighting around the edges of it. It was like gray on the edges, but overall it was working fine and it was simple and got it done. Then I was like, you know what, I'm going to refine this can material. And that's when I was like, metallic paint gives me so much more options, and it's a little bit more complicated, but once I do it once, if I have time to fix it, boom, that's the new template that I use. So I think over time it's that. I don't think I definitely didn't go into it being like, I'm going to make a template of a can. It just occurred that once I needed it a second time, I was like, you know what, I need to think about this more as a template.
Yeah, great. Ryan, any kind of process tips or tricks that you developed over the years?
Ryan, Kate, you can go first.
Yeah. If I'm getting serious about, I'm kind of like in Jacob's boat. Sometimes I just get an idea in my head and I just kind of play around a little bit. But when it's something that's kind of demanding a little bit more attention and calling out more features of a product or something like that, I do like to like pull out a little sketch page, and I'll make some little thumbnail sketches, just basic blocking out of like certain shots that I want to achieve. And it usually helps pretty well. And it's surprising how far a little sketch can go. And like George was saying, like it can kind of help be a guide, because when you get into KeyShot and you just have all the power in the world to kind of create whatever you want, it's easy to get a little off track and lose sight of what you were going for in the beginning, because what you're going for in the beginning was usually something that was inspiring to you. And it's important to not let those things go. And so I would say sketch it down, take a note, and then use those notes to kind of achieve what you're going for. And I like the comment about the lighting as well. Recently, I've been using a lot of reference image before going into rendering. and pulling images that I really like, and really trying to figure out how those maybe certain reflections or materials were achieved, and sometimes I'll just spend personal time even just trying to achieve certain lighting angles and reflections and certain environments just to have in the back pocket. So
Ryan?
Yeah, so my background's really eclectic. So in video production, I would always create storyboards. So these days when I am animating, it's a natural go-to for me, that and mood boards. And then actually I create, if it's product oriented, I'll usually use that 3D in KeyShot with like a diffuse material for those storyboards. So it really helps visualize that. But yeah, mainly it's just inspiration and trial and error, and getting to the end of the shot that you're creating, or the render, and then just saying, if it's not right, it's okay to start over, unless you have deadlines with clients. But yeah, that's pretty much my process there.
Great. Well, one thing that you kind of touched upon, Jacob, in your presentation, and for folks who didn't see Jacob's presentation, that was our kickoff on Monday. It's fantastic, or last Monday. Definitely check that out. And it kind of just talks about sort of how rendering is now kind of used, across Pepsi. And one is you kind of mentioned, which I've heard a lot of, is rendering is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because sort of the more great imagery you give people, the more they want it. Like, oh, I didn't know you could do it that fast. I didn't know I could look that good, right? And so you almost sort of get this position where you're creating a new set of problems, which is now, everyone wants to sort of see hyperreal, and they want to kind of art direct every element of it. As part of this process, for people who work with clients, how do you kind of decide, I'm not going to show this, I'm not going to reveal this, I'm going to make sure I'm very cautious with what I'm providing and when, because each decision marker is a little different, right? You want to make different decisions early in the process than potentially later. So I'll let you start with that, Jacob.
I definitely think the first time we did a 360 rendering of the can, we did like an animation, like a turntable animation. It was like mandated from our chief design officer that he wanted to see that for every single new project. So that's a good example of like, but then when you explain that not everyone knows this program, that's when the templating kind of also came to be, that, okay, well, maybe we can get people on the program that have never used it. Pretty simple to do animations. I also think just being completely honest with everyone when I'm doing an animation, that like something's either going to be easy or hard, is something that I do very, candidly. So when it comes to bottles, like we've been asked, oh, can we make a rendering of a Mountain Dew bottle? And to me, that's like, of course we can, but that's going to take me so much more time. Like those types of images are retouched, and the lighting, and the way that the label interacts, and the way that the plastic material, that's just going to take a lot longer than a metal texture on a can, a hard can. So a lot of times I'll be like, we can definitely do that, but we need more time. Or that's how I go about it, just being honest. And that's how, when, I talked about the Pepsi Rosé, my manager came to me and said, they're asking, or I brought up that we might be able to do the rendering. Let me know, because I know that you've been doing a lot of these types of photorealistic renders recently. Like, do you think you can do it in this time frame? And that, I think, being honest over the course of the time led my manager to think about it a lot differently than coming up to me and being like, hey, I know you can do this, can you get it done? And that, to me, is the right way to go about it, and helps like mitigate any confusion in the capabilities that exist in a specific amount of time. But yeah, I think anything is doable. The more I think about the way KeyShot is, it's like, it's not necessarily super advanced techniques. Like, it's not like learning to play the piano. I feel like it's having, like, you've always cut bread with a specific knife, and then, oh, let me show you this bread knife. It's a lot easier to cut bread with. That's it's not necessarily that now you have to relearn how to cut or anything, but now you have a bread knife. So I think that's kind of something to demystify a little bit, because once there's a new technique, like you think it's going to be like, oh, I need to learn this whole new thing, but it's really just like clicking a button, or adding, like duplicating that texture from just a bump map to a roughness map as well. Like it's really not that difficult when you think about it, but just knowing that it's there, oh, that really changes things.
George, you were mentioning kind of in sort of your product development process, like I think the boxer was the example. You would show sort of three different options or different looks on a product. I mean, has visualization kind of made people say, well, maybe we can have 5 different looks to choose from? I mean, have you seen kind of people wanting more information to decide from, and how have you encountered that?
Well, like I guess I don't know, for Spin Master, the technology seems a little bit. I mean, we've had KeyShot probably in our office now for 5-6 years, but only product people are kind of catching up, and so nobody knows about it too much. So it's like we're using these tools, and they're like, oh wow, this is cool. So they haven't caught on yet, but once they catch on, they probably will start asking for a lot. But for me, I like to giving a lot anyways, and probably much to my art director or creative director's agony. I like to give a lot of looks, and then we pare it down to 3. But I definitely that's something I like to do.
Will, when you're working on a contract, do you specify early on, like, I'm only going to provide this many renderings or this many looks? I mean, do you try to manage that in the beginning of the process to help do that, or you kind of just let it organically feel its way out?
Let's see. So when I'm interacting with a customer who's contacted me because they think they need something, also, sorry, my dog's starting to whine. It's close to lunchtime. Yeah. So when I start talking with them, I really want to identify what they need, rather than just letting them be prescriptive and tell me what they think they need. And from there, I try to basically go and dial in and identify exactly what will get them to their goal, and then try to package that as like an offering. And then hey, please. Hard to
We're all working from home. We're doing the best we can.
I really try to like make sure it's clear that like I want to know what they need first, and make sure they know what they need before trying to sell them and worrying about quantity. And I don't attach a dollar amount to a certain deliverable. It's basically you're coming to me to solve a problem, and there's a price associated with that. I'm going to take care of them.
Yeah, no worries. I'll direct this one to you, Tyler, and Ryan K. One of the things is, like, I'll talk about kind of AR and VR, and we've got a lot of questions about AR and VR. It's interesting when you kind of get people, because they'll say, I want to know what you guys are doing on AR and VR, and we'll say, well, what problem are you trying to solve? And they say, I don't know. I just know I'm supposed to be learning about AR and VR, right? And so one of the things with sort of new technologies, you get a lot of people who almost feel like they need to know what it is without actually knowing what problem it solves. And so you're going to have this, what I kind of sort of this start and stop process, where there's a lot of interest in it, and then people realize, oh, it actually doesn't really maybe solve my problem the way I thought it does. So they kind of lose interest, and then they come back later and say, well, actually, this problem. So now I'm re-interested. How do you guys kind of look at new technology and things that are coming, like the AR kit and Apple? Do you find that people are kind of in that second phase right now, where they were excited about it at first, and then it kind of died down, and now they're kind of coming back on the second round and finding more kind of concrete uses for this stuff?
Yeah. So myself, I don't have VR or AR headset here at home, and I think we're kind of at the stage where like these things are going to become more mainstream, and so like there are these like mystical technologies that people are like, what can these do? What can I do with them? And I think like as we, similar to learning any other software or any other technology, as we like play with them, we'll learn and like understand how to use them further. So, I mean, like I said, I'm not super familiar with AR, VR, but I think it's just a matter of like, you know, using them in non-critical use cases to learn where they can be applied in critical use cases.
Yeah, I was working on a job, and the client requested there to be a interactive rendering, and that was, we used KeyShot XR for that, and it was something that I didn't even know how to answer the question, but luckily somebody in the office I was working was like, I think we could achieve this doing this using KeyShot XR, and it actually took a day to figure out that we were capable of doing it, and then also how to take that result and embed that into a website or something else for it to actually be functional at all, you know, because I was able to use it after it was rendered on my own. But another step is how do you program that into the platform that where it's trying to be used. And so I think, yeah, it's taking a little while for people to grasp it, and it's a technical skills, not even a problem, but more a technical skills issue where it's requiring people to really learn or have to reach out to people who understand what to do. And you know, whether people want to have that type of skill set in their office is up to them. But I do think that the future is always coming. These means will become easier and easier as we get along, but it is a step-by-step process. And once it becomes more available and more easy to use, I think that's when people will start seeing it and be able to use it more themselves. So
Jacob or George, are you guys seeing kind of more push for kind of AR, VR content? Or is it more kind of, it's sort of, it's a wait and see approach right now for you guys?
We use VR a lot for experiential. Sorry, am I?
So like kind of,
back?
you know, yeah, you're back. Yeah. So like sort of like, you know, how, you know, what we're talking about kind of building out a space, you know, for like the Super Bowl, that kind of of an approach.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Sorry.
Yes.
So we use VR a lot for experiential design, and you know, honestly, I don't see a need for it a lot on the small scale object side of things. But the thing about VR is, again, the technology gap and the need for the headset. So a lot of times we have to have people come to the office to actually experience it versus being able to showcase that in a way that's very democratized.
Yeah. George?
I feel like at Spinrest we're like on the cusp of some sort of VR revolution. Either we're gonna go full force or we're gonna walk away. It just seems like, you know, we're right there. We've been talking a lot about digital, like store, you know, in-store, like where you walk into a shop, you walk into a planogram, and you're like pulling products off the shelf. Esco, this company that does sort of packaging stuff, they've sort of showed their visualizer store, and I think KeyShot, you guys also demonstrated something too. So, I mean, I feel like, you know, or the technology is there and it's being pushed to us, but you know, we're just kind of waiting for the tipping point. But yeah, I envision, like, you know, having a store, a shop where you walk in and you have a headset and you're like, you know, if it's Paw Patrol, all of a sudden you're like in the Paw Patrol tower and you're buying Paw Patrol stuff in the tower, you know, or if you're buying like Monster Jam, you're like in a stadium and you could hear like the stuff revving around you, and all of a sudden there's a planogram there where you're pulling stuff off the shelf, and then maybe you buy it and Amazon delivers it, you know, and you know that sort of, you see the packaging, all of a sudden the packaging appears at your house. I don't know, just have all these fantasies.
I like it. Ryan Levy, have you seen more as you go in and talk to customers? Have you seen kind of where they are in kind of finding these more concrete use cases for AR, VR when you talk to them? You're currently muted.
I do that a lot. I don't see it as much as I'd like to. So I know it's a growing function, and George brought up a good point. It's, I think a lot of people are just waiting for a specific time in the technology, but a lot of the concepts are there. I mean, people could do a lot with it. It's just adopting it.
Great. Well, we're coming up to the end of our hour here. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to go through some questions from the audience, and then I'm going to come back with a quick speed round for the people here. Then we're going to do a giveaway. So one question, and I'll direct you to the interesting one. I'll ask you this one, Will. How to make a blood-looking material? How would you go about making a blood material?
I guess it depends what kind of blood. So with that sort of organic stuff, it depends if they've got the geometry modeled. If you've got blood droplets modeled, then pretty simple. If you want it to be opaque, just put a plastic on it. If you want it to be translucent, use translucent. It's pretty simple. Just set your color. If you're talking like somebody who's not using tools to model organic stuff, then of course you're going to be a lot harder pressed. You're going to use a little bit of displacement and a couple of tricky photo references. It can be done, but for that, you're going to need to be pretty intimate with the material graph. So there's quite a few resources out there to learn that as well.
Great. And that's another question is, where would you recommend to go for material graph tutorials? I know that you've actually done one, I believe, during the KeyShot 6 timeframe that we can definitely update soon. And then the manual is a fantastic resource as well. Do you have any other places that you like to go, Will?
I always point people directly to youtube.com/KeyShot3D, which is where you'll find the highest number of tutorials available. The rest is just use the search engine. I hate to say it, but between various users on YouTube who've uploaded stuff, it just comes down to doing a simple search. But really, if you do want to be able to know how to do it from the ground up, the least exciting but most effective way is read the user manual.
It's true. And just so people know, we've been updating our manual quite robustly since the KeyShot 8 timeframe. So definitely check that out. A couple people asking about VR, and obviously people in this work from home situation. I will give a plug to KeyVR. If you haven't tried it already, KeyVR is a great solution. Obviously goes from KeyShot into VR, and we're coming with KeyVR Connect, which will allow multiple users to actually look at the same model. So that's one way that people can kind of stay in touch and collaborate when they're not physically in the same office. One person's asking if KeyShot's taught in schools. It is. We actually have an education program. So if anyone ever is curious about that, you can contact our sales team. We actually have someone who is dedicated to putting KeyShot in schools, education program, as well as setting up inside of schools a student leader who can help basically liaise with the company and direct that. And so, we can do on-campus visits. I believe, Kareem and Ryan, you just visited Long Beach recently and visited some students there. Another question, and I'll kind of ask whoever wants to answer it, but how do you guys keep track and remember your render settings? So you have the samples, the noise amount, the quality. Do you kind of take notes on things, or do you just kind of eyeball it and kind of come back to it later? Do you sort of have an overarching kind of what keeping track of what gets you the results you want from a render setting standpoint? Go ahead, Jacob.
I was going to say a tip that I learned, I think from Will, or maybe Richard, I don't remember because I had 2 workshops with them. But clicking H and having your HUD come up on the upper left-hand corner and actually just tracking the real-time renderer and saying like, oh, it's looking pretty good around 10 samples. I use that pretty much every time I render by clicking H. And that way I can really make sure I'm not like guessing in the final render, like, oh, maybe 250 and I'll kind of go plus or minus what I think from there initially.
Great. Anyone want to add anything? Yeah. Okay.
I'll come in with another boring answer, which is you don't need to keep track of your render settings if you know what each slider does, which sounds super like, oh, get off your high perch. But honestly, if you do kind of understand what each slider is doing, the fastest way you can troubleshoot this on your own, you can hover over each item and it'll give you the definition of what it does. You can also do a rendering with settings really low and then really high, and then just A/B test there. And once you've kind of got a good understanding of what each one does, you can dial in your render settings and save yourself time, because the same render settings for one project are not going to work for the other project. You're going to be wasting time and resources. So you're better off dialing in your render settings for each individual job instead of using the same ones over and over.
Well, the feedback from everyone is they really enjoyed this session. They really want to thank everyone for coming. One thing people are asking, which we can, I know you're doing as well on your session, is taking questions from folks on Instagram and answering those on YouTube. So if you didn't check that out already, Will did it a couple of days ago, and we could definitely look at doing that as well here. All right, so real quick speed round here. I'm going to say to each person, you get one wish list KeyShot 10 item. Ryan, Levy, go first.
Physics.
Physics, okay. Kareem?
Expanding real cloth, because real cloth is amazing.
Okay. George Olarte?
Giving me time to learn the new KeyShot stuff.
Will?
Oh no. I'm just gonna say what Ryan said, collision. That's cool.
Okay. Jacob?
I'm gonna say physical, like different, instead of HDRIs, physical studio setup. So it includes like physical lights.
So you would literally kind of load up a whole studio, like a preset studio with like the lights and the geometry and everything.
Yeah, I'm thinking like back when Grayscale Gorilla was doing like lighting setups in Cinema 4D for different studios with soft lights and stuff. That way you're not, and it can be planes or whatever, but not just being HDRIs or do the lighting yourself. And maybe they have like tables or something, so it's like a physical lighting studio.
We have that on our website, by the way.
Yeah.
We have some.
Tyler. Oop, I think Tyler's frozen. Ryan K., I'll go to you.
Yeah, I like the physics comment. I think simulation in some way would be interesting if that could be any way possible. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, this wraps up KeyShot World 2020. Again, I want to thank all the presenters. You guys did a wonderful job. So much great information. If you missed anything, again, go to our agenda page. Everything up there, the content that's included. You can watch the tutorials. It's also on our YouTube live page. Reminder, the Render Weekly Render Contest is still running. It will run through April 6th. You can still win a KeyShot Pro license. So you can go to renderweekly.com. If you go on Instagram, follow along. The last one was the shader ball. We had some fantastic entries for that one. This one is the Cloud Library. So you just grab any item, anything at all from the Models tab in the Cloud Library. You just tag it on there. You enter it. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to do our final giveaway here. So let me share the screen here. And our final giveaway will be a Hero 8 black camera from the wonderful GoPro. I want to thank all of our sponsors, Dosh Design, GoPro, 3D Off the Page, NVIDIA, Main Gear. Thank you all for and Stanley Black & Decker. I can't forget them for all the wonderful giveaways. And today's giveaway winner is Rick May from Orbis Corp. Congratulations, Rick. You're going to get a Hero 8 camera. We will follow up with you directly, and we'll send it over to you. And with that, we conclude our program. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you out there soon.